Hi, welcome to High Output, the podcast exploring how today's engineering leaders are building tomorrow's high-performing teams. I'm your host, William Cheng, and each episode we sit down with visionary engineering leaders who are forging new paths in our rapidly evolving field. Join us as we gain a window into tomorrow's software organizations and discover what's next for our profession and the entire software industry. This episode is brought to you by Maestro AI. Engineering leaders, let's be real. Building high-performing software teams has never been more challenging. You're juggling delivery timelines, team health, and the constant pressure to communicate value upward. That's where Maestro comes in. Maestro enables you to improve velocity, spot blockers, and make better decisions faster by seamlessly integrating with your existing tools like Slack, Jira, and GitHub. Maestro cuts through the noise, revealing exactly where your team is spending time and energy. Visit getmaestro.ai for more info, because you don't know everything, but Maestro does. Our guest today is Adil Ajmal, the CTO at Fandom. We're super excited to have him. He's focused on increasing fan engagement across Fandom's existing platform, as well as leading the development of brand new products, gaming tools, and data services. He also oversees the overarching AI strategy and development for the entire organization. He has a ton of leadership experience, having held positions at Lending Home, Amazon, Intuit, Razorfish, and much more. Adil graduated with a BS in computer science from the University of Texas at Austin, and when not working, he can be found skiing with his two sons, riding motorcycles, or training his German Shepherd. Welcome to the show, Adil. Tell me about yourself. How did you get into engineering leadership?
Sure, it's been an interesting journey, and the leadership part honestly wasn't really intentional. Uh, I started programming as a kid, fell in love with computers when I was in middle school, started programming Logo and then Basic, and took computer science in high school and college and all that good stuff, and then started out as as an engineer, but kept getting pulled into more of leadership positions. In fact, there was one interesting one where over a year my team scaled from 4 people to
Wow.
50 people. And so when you're leading 50 people, you're not doing coding, you're not doing as many of the fun things. And so after that, I actually explicitly moved back into an engineering role again, like, on a core platform team at Homestead. But then in a couple of years, I got pulled into another leadership and management role. But this time, the team was smaller, so I could stay hands on, which was the part that I liked. I didn't want to be away from coding and, like, from technology. But I think the thing that kept pulling me back in again and again in these positions was I always wanted to figure out how I was having an impact on the user. Because at the end of the day, like as much as I love technology, for me it's always been a means to an end. And I always try to figure out how can I how can I actually go and help somebody with this, right? Like how do I change a particular situation and so on. And so in each of these companies that I worked at, I would work a lot with not just the engineering side of things. I'd work with product, I'd work with marketing, with finance and sales, because I really wanted to see how we were eventually doing something for the user and how we were helping the business. So that kept pulling me into these other positions where people wanted to, have me have more impact on product or other aspects. But then this next time around, I was able to manage a smaller team, remain hands-on. Um, and I think for the longest time, even till I think, I was a director, I made sure that I always had some parts of the roadmap that I
Mm.
was working on. I would just try to pick ones that were not on the critical path so that I didn't delay anything on my team's aspect, but, still really got to be into things. But at some point, it starts becoming harder and harder. Like, as you start moving into more executive leadership roles, the job is just a very different one, right? Like it's not your responsibilities are to be doing a lot of other things, and coding, as much as I love doing it, wasn't in that critical path basically. And so that was a little bit of the journey. I got to learn a lot from really great people along the way, both from a leadership perspective, a technical perspective. And I think along the way, where I really started honing my skills was on the side of scale, like scaling organizations, both from a technology and product perspective, but also from a people and process perspective. I'm passionate about both ends of that equation, and then I've just been very fortunate to have gone, to have been at the right place at the right time to learn from a lot of great people, and have gone through a bunch of different acquisitions those have been very interesting experiences. And I've then taken larger roles in the acquiring companies, and then after a few years, gone back and taken something small again, and and then taken that to a larger scale, right? So doing a rinse and repeat. Um, and so one of my earlier companies called Photosite got acquired by United Online. That was an interesting learning experience. Then I was back at Homestead running engineering. We got acquired by Intuit, taking on a much larger role there. I was running engineering for five of their properties, including Intuit.com. Um, then did another startup, came in, it was called Posturus. We ended up scaling it and selling that to Twitter. Then did an education technology startup, which I was super, super passionate about, called 10 Marks Education. As we scaled that, Amazon became interested, so we ended up going through an acquisition with Amazon. My last company was in the fintech space called Lending Home. We were the largest fix and flip lender in the US. And these days, I'm having a lot of fun at Fandom. I'm actually going to be hitting my 6 year mark in
Nice.
6 weeks at Fandom. So, yeah, and so Fandom is a really, really cool place. We are the largest platform in the world with 350 million unique visitors a month, with over 250,000 communities across any topic that you can think of, across entertainment and gaming, with more than 50 million pages of content. So we also own a few media brands like GameSpot and Metacritic and TV Guide. We also own a gaming commerce company called Fanatical. We have our own proprietary ad stack. We have the largest agentic AI engine in the entertainment and media space at this particular
Nice.
point with our data insights product. Yeah, like lots of fun stuff, like especially happening on the AI side. We've been pretty forward thinking about that as a company, and so yeah, so it's been a really really cool place to be.
Amazing.
So that's a little bit of like what I'm up to these days, and yeah, what I've been doing in the
Amazing,
past.
amazing. Actually, I didn't want to interrupt, but when you said middle school basic, that was me as well.
Oh, very
I was
cool.
one of those
Which one?
quick
Like
basic
GW or
was
Quick or like?
my thing.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, when I was doing it, like, yeah, it was GW Basic, like, at my time, like, when I started out, well, first just Basic, then it was GW Basic, and then did a bunch of Quick Basic. But by that point, I started moving on to C++.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I was a quick basic, and I played around with VB back in the day. Those
sure.
were some of my earlier earlier programming languages. So
Very
glad
cool.
to.
I've even, as a kid, like, when I was in high school, I've even done an international software competition where you program in Basic across
Amazing.
Asia.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Is Which is very, very cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that existed. I think in my world back then, it was like, let me
It,
just
it,
try to, try to hack on this little game or
I,
something.
I didn't know about it either, and then I found out it was across 30 countries, and it was I think across like I think a SARC summit or something like that. And so you had regional competitions, then countrywide competitions, and then six people from each country would get invited to one of the hosting countries. And so the year that I got to go, it was happening in Singapore in
Nice.
1991. And so we had 30 countries participating. It was a really, really fun experience. I was in high school at the time. It was awesome.
Incredible. That probably also made you want to continue doing software as you grew up, right? I mean, that's just sounds like
Oh, 100%. I had a very similar track on that. Like once I got into computers, I took computer science in high school. Like, this thing that we just talked about, that absolutely solidified as well. And so going into college, like there wasn't any question about not doing computer science and then not going into software development. So
nice, 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 nice. Well, fantastic, fantastic. So I want to ask, I heard something super interesting, right? You've been at from the small scale to the large scale to small scale again and back and forth. What patterns do you see? What's the same and what's different across these different scales for engineering leadership? You mentioned a little bit around how much hands-on time you have, but um, what else is different?
I think I'll start with a different part. The largest difference as you start going through scale is you have to be able to have an impact through people that are that can be pretty far removed from you. And so if you've got large organizations, both your own organization as well as other organizations across the company, uh, you are dependent on having an impact through them because there's only so much
Mm.
that you can do individually, right? Like this is as you scale, the only way to have like large impact is to be able to mobilize large teams of people to be focused on a singular goal. And so that part is consistent across companies as you scale them, but that's honestly one of the harder parts of the job as well. When like when you're alone, like when you're just writing code, you've got full control. Then let's say like if you're managing a small team or if you're a small startup, it's still not that it's easy, but you still have more direct influence on the people that you're working with across the table or like in the same office and and being able to all make sure that you're working on the same thing. But as you really start scaling, as you've got distributed teams that are distributed globally, and sometimes when you've got teams that are not even in the same business units, when you're at large companies, but you're trying to do an initiative that's company wide, uh, that's a pattern that is consistent across larger organizations, but that's something that starts becoming pretty complicated. I remember, I think my one of the hardest lessons that I learned, and this one at one point in my career many years back was at Intuit, where I was uh, I was asked to add a project to an existing roadmap, and so Intuit used to launch QuickBooks every year. It used to be an
Hmm.
annual release. This is back in the day when this used to be a desktop software, which meant that the release cycle was very fixed because the CDs had to be printed, they had to go on shelves and in stores. And so you couldn't just add stuff to the roadmap. But we got to Intuit, like our company got to Intuit through an acquisition, and in the middle of that year's release, we were told, okay, now you have to add this particular product that got acquired, into some of the QuickBooks workflows and stuff. And I ended up being charged to do that. And as I started talking with people across the company, they're like, not this year. We can talk about it for next year. And there was no way to get it in this year, right? And so I had to work with 16 different teams across
Wow.
different functions and BUs just to try to get that across. And I didn't even know a lot of these great people because I was new, right? And so having to reach out, having to figure out how do you influence them to get your particular piece on their roadmap while their roadmap is already fixed, was a very interesting learning experience. But then that's the thing that you have to do over and over again when you are trying to have an impact on a large scale across distributed teams, most of whom may not even be like part of your
Yeah.
organization.
Well, how do you how do you do that? I mean, quite frankly, right? Like, how do you motivate? As you said, like
Sure,
if you're the boss, you can just tell someone, hey, do this, right? But in you
exactly.
can't, right? Especially then that in that world.
You can't exactly.
What do you do?
You you absolutely can't like just tell somebody to do that, right? Like you have no control over that. I think where I found success with that is to be able to align people across common goals. And I think one of the challenges that people have is they'll go and they'll ask somebody to do something without setting the context and seeing what like you collectively get out of it. And part of it is because people are trying to move fast, and so a lot of times they will not spend the time to build context and alignment from that standpoint. However, the thing is, if you really want to get people to come along with you, you have to make sure that they not only understand, but they also internalize what you've internalized and what you're trying to do. And so in those particular situations, like and especially back at Intuit, like when we were trying to do this, I had to go and explain to people why it would be an advantage for the company to be able to do this. And even though it was being inconvenient and people would have to move roadmaps around, why this would be a win for everybody collectively. And when you get people to align on that, then everybody generally always wants to do the right
Mm.
thing. It's a question of getting them to agree whether what the right thing is, right? And so if you spend enough time and investment in in building that context for people and getting them to align, then you can absolutely get them all to row in the same direction and honestly do things that are unimaginable at certain times.
Amazing. That's great. That's great. Well, does that has that changed? It sounds like this is your experience now, having done this for a while. I mean, first, was it this easy at the time? And then secondly, nowadays, is there anything different here, or do you think the same strategies still hold?
I think the pattern for me, has not only held, but I think I've my belief in it has become stronger and stronger over the years. I think how you go about doing it, may be different. Especially, I think that interesting challenges come in when you're more distributed. Then let's say like you add a cultural aspect to it, where you're not just distributed, let's say within the U.S., but globally. And then people have their own roadmaps and so on. As you keep adding all of these things, you keep increasing the level of difficulty. But the underlying goal of getting people on the same page, getting them all to believe in that same goal across all of these different factors, I think that part for me has not only remained consistent, but it's continued to
Okay.
work.
How okay, so here's a and I don't want to poke holes in it. I really want to learn about this,
No, no,
right?
it's
Like
okay. Go
in
for
a
it.
distributed world where, you have teams, let's say you have a team in India or a team in Europe or something like that, right? Like
Mhm.
how do you
Sure, I do.
but how do you actually do that? Is it just, first of all, are you even sure they are aligned on the high level goals? And if not, maybe how do you do that step first? And then yeah, but basically just walk me through the process. Like in this remote world with all these different offices, what do you do?
No, great question, right? Like, it definitely things makes things more complicated. And what you asked in terms of, whether they're even aligned or not, that is a great thing to figure out, because if you just assume that, that is going to get you in a lot of trouble. And so asking and validating and asking 10 different ways to make sure that people actually understand, and giving them, like, the opportunity to really poke holes in it, so that they don't feel that they're just being given something and you're trying to force them to alignment, but where they feel that they actually have skin in the game, like they've been heard, like their ideas maybe have even been incorporated into it because they had a great idea, and the goal may even change slightly, like based on that idea, or like the outcome may change. Well, that aspect is absolutely key. Now, when it comes to the distributed teams, Fandom is very distributed. I've worked with distributed teams pretty much most of my career, but then after COVID, I think distribution just
Mm-hmm.
went on steroids, right? Because first it used to be more distributed across offices, and then after COVID, it was just remote. So you weren't necessarily like, even talking with people in the same location. And our hiring changed significantly after that, because we've hired people, all over the place, right? So they can't necessarily come into an office. When you do have offices, actually being able to travel
Mm.
and get people in the room is there's honestly no replacement for that. So I still make a lot of effort to travel to our different offices, especially when we're trying to do bigger initiatives and you need to build alignment, because the ability to have that conversation, that human interaction, when you're all in one place, you can't replicate that. Now, of course, we can't always do that, and so we still have to make sure that things work, over Zoom or whatever else you end up
Mm-hmm.
using. But that human connection, like that it is still one of the most important things. Now, the other one where it becomes really important when you're distributed. One is taking the time to set more context, and then asking questions and giving people time, because different people will process information,
Mm.
at different speeds. And so just making an assumption that, hey, just because I talked through this right now in this meeting and now everybody is on the same page, is usually not the best way to go, and will result in more problems. And so trying to make a little bit of time to make sure that once you've given people that information, you're giving them some time to process, for them to be able to come back, maybe like the next day, ask more questions, and so on. The other thing around it is having things in
Mm.
writing. This is really important for a few different reasons, um, and especially when you have language barriers across, like different cultures and different locations and so on, because everybody may process what you're saying differently at that particular point. Their understanding may be a little different, but when you put it in writing, um, you're basically leveling the playing field for people to be able to understand that. They can take
Mm.
their time to go and process it, like they can dive deeper into it. They can ask more questions in an asynchronous way, where somebody may not actually be able to ask that question right away in that particular meeting, and so it's after being able to talk through things, really being able to put things in writing. It also forces you to make sure that you can be concrete with your thoughts, and it gives others the ability to really understand what you're trying to do. And so, these are simple things. There's no rocket science to it, but continuing to do these again and again, not taking shortcuts on these things is what really helps when you're working with distributed teams.
Nice, nice, super helpful. And it actually echoes something I've heard from someone else. I don't recall someone who said your job as a leader is to just repeat yourself a lot. You know, just
So sometimes, yes.
sometimes you just need to say it a lot of times for people to get it. I mean, and it makes sense, right? Everybody's busy. Everybody has their own
Yeah,
things they're working on, and you need to cut through that noise. That's it.
yeah.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
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 go
yeah.
go
No,
for it.
it's. I was just gonna say it's. It's glad. I'm glad that your head's in the same spot. Um, so I want to shift gears a little bit, right? You've been talking a lot about human connection,
Sure.
about
Mhm.
making sure people understand what's happening and everything. So you're also overseeing AI strategy at Fandom. Now, in a
Yep.
lot of ways, in the news especially, like AI is in opposition to people, right? It's like, oh, you're gonna replace people, you get rid of people. How do you think about that? Like, is it this opposition type thing, or is it something that AI is going to work with people to make the organization better? How do you plan ahead for the future?
Sure. No, that's been a fun debate. Like in my personal opinion, I don't see this as an opposition to people at all. I do think that it increases people's productivity, people's output significantly. It helps you do a lot of things faster, sometimes better as well. And it it will get to a point where there may be certain things that you don't have to do manually. Or you can just ask it to do and continue to get better and better. But I don't see this as something that's just going to come in and and replace people. Like I'm not in the camp where I would say, all right, cool, let's not hire more engineers because AI will do everything. But at the same time, if you're not using AI, you are shooting yourself in the foot. Like I'll be very very explicit and and direct about that particular piece. And so, at our company, we've tried to be as forward thinking about this as possible, not just in terms of using AI from a development perspective or in a lot of other operational areas, but also how we leverage it within the product
Mm,
itself. Like, and so we're using it across a large spectrum. But let's say, like, if you talk about like the human aspect of it, and let's say, like, specifically since we're talking more about engineering, we've set a goal of AI adoption for our
mm,
teams. We're not setting out like with a 100% goal. It's it's harder. It's also evolving pretty quickly. So we started this out a couple of years back. We've made sure that we have enterprise licenses for all the tools that we need for our engineers. Copilot, for example, like being one of them, because we also want to make sure that our code is not being used to train
mm-hmm,
public models and so on. And so, so we are using enterprise licenses for it. However, when Copilot originally started out, it was good for certain things. It wasn't as good for other things. And change is hard. And so if you just tell people, hey, go use AI tools, not as many of them are going to
mm-hmm,
jump on it, especially if they don't find the best experience like when they start out with in it. And so, and so we've continued to stay at it. We measure our usage. We also bring in the right tool for the right thing. So if you're doing more front end development, we have Cursor that you can use, in our enterprise license agreements. Copilot is better for a bunch of other things, and it's continued to improve. And so, if you used it, let's say a year and a half ago, and it didn't work for you, it shouldn't be a one and done type of thing. Let's find another way, like where you can use it. And so, we track that, um, across the board, so that we can continue to
mm,
improve it. But then we also try to find champions within our team who've had good experiences so that they can be the promoters of it for other team members and they can show them which tool is better for which particular thing because not all of them will do the same thing as well, right? And so honestly half of the problem is knowing what it's going to be good at and what it's not going to be good at. And so we try to make sure that our team that that our teams are spending time teaching each other about those aspects as well. And we don't just do that in engineering. We try to do this across the organization. For example, if you do video production, there are so many tools that are now
mm.
really, really improving that particular process. Right? Like there are process, like there are things that we're using across marketing and so on. And this is all just from a productivity perspective. We're obviously doing a lot of development from an AI perspective as well, since we sit on 50 million plus pages of unstructured
Yeah.
content. And so you can imagine like, some of the work that we've been doing over the last several years before Gen AI even became like a popular thing. But but we've, as it's evolving, we're trying to bring more and more of that in, and we're building agentic systems, and so for us, AI has been across the board. Luckily, the organization was is a lot more forward thinking about it from the very
Amazing.
start.
Well, this ties back to something you said earlier, which is you need to have people be aligned on the same goals and everything, right? But uh, uh, there are engineers, especially, who are not fully aligned on AI, right? Like there's some that are all in and
Sure.
say like, "Hey, this is helpful," and you'll see on Hacker News or something, you'll see a post come up and someone will say, "Oh, hey, this doesn't really make me more productive." And do you have folks like that in your organization? And if you don't, do you know how?
No, no, no. Look, I think being skeptical about it every now and then is perfectly natural, especially if you have a bad experience with it. Like, as I was mentioning, let's say if you used Copilot a year and a half ago, and depending on the type of problem that you were trying to solve, it didn't solve it well for you, you're going to be more reluctant using it the next time. Because, we've had cases where people have had to spend more time debugging what came out of an AI, generated code base versus for them to be able to go do something themselves. That's why I think it's really important to know what it's going to be good at and what it's not, so that you're trying to use it for the right things. And then the other thing is being able to go back.
Mm,
I think, if you just say, hey, it didn't work well the last time, I'm never going to use it again, then again you're basically handicapping yourself, because like all technology, things continue to evolve and improve. And from an AI perspective, AI is going through one of the fastest evolutions that you'll see for any particular technology. And so the whole thing about this is that this is change management, and change management is hard. Inertia is
mm-hmm.
very strong, and people generally don't like change. Like, there are only going to be a few people that'll actually jump on the next new thing to figure it out. For most other people, if they're used to a particular workflow, good or bad, it's hard to change. And so we've tried to be really deliberate about how we help people continue to improve. So, like, we've taken a group of volunteers from our engineering team, and we've created this AI committee
Mm,
that now helps the rest of the organization in terms of adoption and processes, and and doing examples of what's working well or not. And at the same time, they're also measuring, because I've set a goal for 80% adoption of AI tools across the engineering organization for this year, right? Like last year was smaller, next year maybe 95 or 100%. But we're not trying to jump to 100% like in the first year, but again, because we know that not everybody is going to use it at the same speed. But our goal for this year is 80%, and I think we're actually doing pretty well on that. But the change management piece is something that you have to be really deliberate about. If you just tell people, hey, go use AI, it's not going to work that way. And by the way, it doesn't always work well. I was doing a project. My son finished high school a few weeks back, and he had a final project to create a game. And I told him, hey, let me just go and play with AI and just see,
mm-hmm.
like, if I can replicate this project or not, right? And so I started building it out, and then I also took his code base because I wanted to see if I could, use AI to improve it. And I was trying different models out on that particular code base, like, with what I was trying to do with it, and you get different results. And honestly, like, I tried. It was just a fun thing. I ended up doing an all nighter on it just because it was that I was loving it. But at certain points, I had very different results between all the different models that I tried out of
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI, Google, and Claude, and they all did certain things really well. But like at the end, Claude is the one that actually ended up saving me. So, so, so again, like, if I just said, "Hey, OpenAI didn't work," and I just didn't use anything else again, like, I'd be handicapping
Yeah.
myself. So,
Well, what's interesting here, what's I really would love to know how you balance this because as you've said repeatedly, right? AI needs experimentation. You need to understand what it's good at, what models to use, maybe even what tools to use. But fandom, like you guys are serving 350 million users, right? And they're expecting
yeah,
reliability. And so how do you balance like
absolutely.
you ship fast, you want to you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, but you also need to be stable and everything like how do you balance that?
That is, you're absolutely correct, and hence, like, the deliberate part and the change management part, right? Like, let's say, like, even if you're doing AI to generate tools, you don't want to skip the code review part. You don't want to skip like the actual
Mm,
automated test suites. Now, we're bringing AI into, let's say, automated test suites as well, but then you're still going to have some checks and balances. So especially till you start seeing it mature in a particular area, right? And then you're never going to basically make you're never going to give up on all of your monitoring, right? Like or the workflow that you've got to test it before it goes to production and so on. So it's you're not just giving it the keys and saying, all right, cool, go drive, do whatever, but you're still using it, and the more confidence you end up having in certain aspects of it, the more you'll use it in those particular areas. And again, not every one of our teams is going to use it for every single thing at the same time. It's about knowing what will work better and what not. And then here's another example. Human oversight in certain cases becomes very interesting, so and very, very necessary. So we've got a large community of creators. We've got 250,000 communities, and so a few
Mm-hmm.
million creators that are creating content across all of these. Um, and we're trying to leverage AI to help them create, content faster and better, and so on. We're also using AI to extract insights out of it, or let's say, also do translations into other languages. Now, AI translation may be perfectly fine, but when you're talking about content that may not actually be
Mm-hmm.
facts, the translations may become different. So, as an example, we were doing some translations of a few different wikis, and Shogun is one of the things that we translated into
Mm-hmm.
German. Now, Shogun worked really well because there's prior art for it. Like, it's based on books, it's based on, actual historical events. And so, even as you have different AI models that go through and translate it out, they have so much training sets, to be able to go and translate that better. Now, we took Expedition 33,
Mm-hmm.
sort of a gaming community, and as you're trying to translate that out, the translation may be completely factually correct. However, let's say if that game was also made for the German market, or the German users were calling certain campaigns in a different way, your translation may be factually correct, but if it doesn't actually match with how people are
Mm-hmm.
using it, it's not going to work out. Right? It's not going to be creating utility for users, and that's where human oversight comes in as well. So what we've tried to do from a content perspective is make sure that we involve our creators and our communities as we use AI on the product side and the
Mm-hmm.
content side. So they're involved, they've got the editorial rights, they can correct things, and then and then we can take those corrections and make sure that we continue to teach our models, and so on. And so that human aspect of it in the loop is extremely important for us. And I think that applies to both, if you're writing code, or if you're curating content or creating insights out of it and stuff. It's the human aspect is still very much there.
Amazing, amazing. Well, where do you think we're all going? Right? Like, right now we're in the human in the loop. We're still in the experimentation phase. What about, let's say, like 3, 5 years from now? Where, if you had to put your bet, where do you think we're gonna land?
It's it is definitely a tough one. I mean, you could debate whether Skynet is going to be real or not, but but honestly, I think if you think about it from an engineering and product development perspective, AI will change how development is done. Like AI is, the AI abilities are getting better and better at a rapid speed, and so a lot of the code that engineers write that are, that's more boilerplate, some of the standard problems that you're trying to solve, AI will continue to do that. And so for people that are still just trying to do those things, they are going to
Mm-hmm.
have a challenge because companies will legitimately use AI for that. Hell, engineers are going to use AI for being able to take care of a lot of those tasks, which AI can easily do for
Mm-hmm.
them. And so hopefully, where I hope, we're going to end up is that, humans are creating and solving higher value problems and using AI as a tool to be able to help them solve those things faster. However, if you're not using AI, if you're coming out of college and you're still just doing basic coding and stuff without utilizing AI and stuff, I think the world is going to change for you a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Adil. It was incredibly insightful. You went through a tour of, from your decades of experience to even thinking about the future and everything. It's been an amazing journey. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
it's absolutely my pleasure, Will.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of High Output. If today's conversation was useful, please take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Engineering leadership is evolving rapidly, and we're committed to bringing you insights from the front lines every week. Visit getmaestro.ai/high output for show notes, transcripts, and past episodes. Until next time, I'm William Cheng, and this has been High Output, where we explore how today's engineering leaders are building tomorrow's high-performing teams.